It's 1974, and one day I get a phone call from Gene Serwinski, founder of Serwin-Vega. The first thing he says is, "What the hell are you doing to my speakers?" Why I would get a call from Gene Serwinski takes some explaining. And that's where this story starts. My musical career started, I'm thinking maybe about 1960. It's hard to remember back that far, but I know that in 1963, I switched from the ever-popular clarinet to the guitar. At first, I didn't have an amplifier or anything. I had an acoustic dreadnought that my aunt lent me to learn on. Before long, I had gotten my first electric guitar and amplifier. A Sears Silvertone 1476 guitar, looked like a black Stratocaster, and a 1481 amp, like this. It's 5 watts with an 8-inch speaker. Quite the thing. It's about this time too that my interest in electronics began, because I took that amplifier apart so many times that all the screws were stripped out after a while. By 1964, I had graduated to a Silvertone 1484, supposedly 60 watts, and 2 12-inch speakers. This was a good amp. It ran me pretty good for a while, but it wasn't loud enough. It wasn't loud enough. Amplifiers were getting louder, and things had to progress. So maybe about 1965, right around there, I got me one of these. Well, actually, I didn't get it. My dad got it for me. God bless his soul. I tell you. He got me this. I really wanted a Super Beetle, but we couldn't really afford a Super Beetle, so they settled for a Buckingham, which they said was the equivalent of an AC-30, which was what the Beatles used on stage in the beginning. So that was cool. But this wasn't a Jennings amp. This was a Thomas Organ built Vox, a solid state. So I started off with tubes, and now I went to solid state here, 1965 or so. Okay. It wasn't but maybe a year that amp had been in the shop 3 times, and it was always blown outputs. And by that time, I kind of blew the speakers in it. So they no longer worked. It was at this point that I started customizing things. Got rid of that Buckingham bottom, and I replaced it with a Fender dual showman bottom, 2 JBL D140Fs, and a cabinet. The only thing is, it wasn't a Fender dual showman. It was a Billy Stevens dual showman. I made that thing in wood shop at school. I actually got a good grade on it. At any rate, it was indistinguishable from a dual showman. Later on, I had traded that in, and they thought it was real. Maybe somebody out there today has got that cabinet. And it wasn't made in Fullerton, California. It was made in Chicago. Now that setup, I actually did a lot to improve that Buckingham head. Gave it projection, gave it body. I used that rig for, well, geez, the next couple years. But also in the ensuing years, the music business began to become more like business. Yeah, we had management, We had roadies. They were on the payroll. We had union contracts. We were making demos in the recording studio, and we went from playing the backyard parties to concert halls. It was kind of like the big time. It was a lot of fun at the time. What we did one day was had a band meeting. And seeing as we had some income, we decided to get rid of the hodgepodge of equipment in the back line and get all matching amplifiers. Well, I wanted Marshalls. I've seen all these big bands in England using these things, and they were the amp to have. But because of the disastrous Rose Morris distribution deal that Jim Marshall made, a Marshall cost like what you'd pay for a house. I mean, gee, they were expensive, if you could even find them. Also noticed that the Who, Peter Townshend, the Who, he started using a thing called a high watt, made by Jim Reeves. Once again, you couldn't get these amps. You couldn't find them anywhere. There was one time we got all set. We drove out to a warehouse out by O'Hare Airport late on a rainy evening to see some new amplifiers that just came in from England. And we walked in there, and there was a line of Sound City amplifiers. Well, they looked impressive at first, but as we began to check them out and look at them, I mean, we haven't even heard the things yet, We kind of decided that they were a little rough around the edges for us, and we could have got these things for almost nothing. But we passed on them. Well, I had no idea that those were high watts. Well, I didn't know it at the time. I would have killed to get those things. But the decisions you make, what can you say? Well, at the time, in the United States, you get Fender amps. You could get Ampeg. Ampeg made a good line of amps. You could get Baldwin. You could get the Vox, but those were Thomas organ Voxes. They weren't the Jennings JMI Voxes, the good ones from England, And you didn't have a lot of choice, but there was one company out of Chanute, Kansas, called Custom. And they made these things. And that's what we got. We got a backline of big, white K200 Customs. And they were good amps. They were powerful, durable. They looked cool, I suppose. Yeah, they fit the times. They were the amp to have. And so we used these custom amplifiers for the next few years after that. Now, these amps were all 100 watters. Getting more into the big leagues now. Didn't have to turn these amps up all the way. You used to have to dime that Buckingham. And that's probably why the thing blew up the way it did. I had it running wide open all the time. These, you could run them 7, 8, and they were good. They were good and sturdy. But as time went on, this band broke up, and I was off on another venture, another band, so almost starting from scratch. And we were back to a hodgepodge of equipment in the back line again. Well, this time, we had an in with the guys at Custom, and they just come out with a new line of amps called Casinos. And we got a back line of Casinos. Now, these Casinos were different. These were 200 watts. 812s per stack. This was a more formidable amplifier system. You know, we'd just gotten these amps. They were just offloaded off the truck, and I think it was the next day or the day after that, we had our first gig at the University of Chicago's Great Circle Hall. We showed up, really hadn't run these amps yet. And we got them all set up, got ready, got up there on stage, turned them on. Pretty much dimed them because it was a big room. And we hit that first note, and oh my God. Oh, my vision went blurry. My knees got weak. It was so loud. We were probably pushing 120 decibels. Holy smokes, were these things loud.
She made me deaf, you know.
But we soldiered on. Backed off the amps a little bit and finished the show. But that was an eye-opener. That was the loudest I'd ever heard us play, including outside festivals. It was incredible. This was in the era of progressive rock. You had your power trios. I had bands like Rush, you know, and backline amplification was at its zenith at this time. Well, some time has passed. It's now 1974. Gone through a few bands, some successful, some not so successful. Right now, I'm in a three-piece band. There's me, and there's my bassist, Norman. I've worked with Norman since grade school, on and off in bands. We're the best of friends to this day. And a new guy from Calumet City named Don. And once again, we have a backline situation where we have inconsistent equipment. Both myself and Norm are kind of scroungers. We like to get parts and components and look things up and build stuff ourselves and stuff like that. What I've done in the past year or so was I got a hold of a Marshall output and a power transformer for a 100-watt Marshall for like a 1959. And I've built myself a Marshall 1959, a Plexus. But we haven't really packaged this yet. And both myself and Norm decided that we were going to build a line of amplifiers. We were going to start an amplifier company. We were going to make amplifiers, big, powerful amps for this thing. I was going to use the Casino as one of the amps, and I was going to use that Plexi Marshall for the other amp, you know. And it's much like the pioneers of these amps did in the beginning. Jim Marshall started making Fender clones, and that became Marshall. You know, I mean, Conrad Sumholm for Sun. He was making Dynakits. He was taking Dynakits and making them into Sun amps. The thought was that what we needed to do was make working prototypes before we could go and form the business. I'd come up with a name and a logo like this. Thought it was cool at the time, Rhino. And both myself and Norm, though, we had a little problem. See, I lived in an apartment, so I didn't have a workshop really. And Norm lived in an apartment too. He didn't have a workshop, but what Norm had was he had an abandoned house next door to his own house. And he had access to the place. We set up a wood shop, a table saw, and some routers, and ran an extension cord over from his apartment down into the basement of this place. But it wasn't on an idyllic spring day like you just saw. It was more like this. Yeah, it was like 0 degrees out. That'd be minus 18°C for my foreign friends, you know. It was a cold night. But we went ahead and we started making these amps. I made a classic stack. I made 2 speaker cabinets, 4 12s in each, and a head I put in the casino electronics inside there. I also made another head, and I put in the Marshall Plexi electronics inside of that one. Norman, on the other hand, had got a hold of these brand new Cerwin-Vega 18-inch, I think they're 400-watt speakers from somewhere. I don't know. He dug them up. And he made these bass reflex cabinets for him. Nice cabinets. And put them in there. Well, we finally got this backline going. They aren't identical backline, but you know, a bass system looks different than a guitar system, yet they still carry the same theme. You know, professionalism. I'd like to interrupt the story here for a second. Norman just came by to take a look at how this video is going because I'm talking about him. He informs me that I don't have the bass cabinet stuff exactly right. He actually made a couple kinds of bass cabinets. The one I showed you is one of them. He made a couple of those. He made a couple other kind, more like subwoofers, and those contain the Cerwin-Vega 18s. All right, well, back to the story. Sorry to interrupt. So now that we had this equipment built, we started using it. The guitar amp and with the 2 heads worked flawlessly. It was a great setup. I mean, the Marshall, I'd get that Marshall that I always wanted back then, you know. And when I needed a little more oomph, bigger rooms, I'd use that casino and it would peel paint. That thing was great. Norm's setup was working good too. You know, Norman was driving his with 2 heads, an Ampeg SVT and a Sun 2000S, running maybe 4 cabinets. But there was a problem with Norm's. We got done playing one time and he says, hey, one of these cabinets went dead. There was one with the Cerwin-Vega 18 in it. Sure enough, the speaker was blown. It was bad. It wasn't long after that he says, hey, the other one went out too. So both of those Cerwin-Vegas went bad. Now, those weren't bought from Cerwin-Vega. They were bought from a third party. There's no warranty, so he's just out now with these 2 18-inch speakers. It's, you know, a bit of a problem. Well, you know, back then, a good working musician was in the band playing, or they were in college, or they were working a job, or they were in college and working a job, or they weren't working at all, they were just playing music. Well, at that time, I was working a job. I worked as a service manager for Pioneer Electronics up in Stone Park. My boss was a man named Norm Casson. He lived in California. That's where he was from. Hired me to run the Stone Park Service Center. And I got to take this opportunity to say, Norm, I apologize from the bottom of my heart because I gave you no opportunity but to fire me. I know. My heart really wasn't in it, Norm. I says, you knew that. But at any rate, Norm would come out every month or two, and we'd discuss business, and he'd check the books and do his things like he does as being the boss, you know. We'd go out to lunch, and we'd talk the electronics business. One of these times, we were talking, and I told Norm about the problem we were having with these Cerwin-Vega 18s, that they, you know, 400-watt speakers, and they're burning up, they're blowing out, you know. And he goes, really, you know. He says, you know, my neighbor is Gene Serwinski. I think when I go back, I'm going to tell him about this. And I went, okay, great, you know. Well, it was a couple days later that I got that call where Gene Serwinski says, "What the hell are you doing to my speakers?" And of course, he's joking around and stuff, you know, he wants to know. And I explained to him that, you know, we were using this Sun 118 RH design for the cabinets, and the speakers weren't lasting. We were just driving it with an SVT head. We weren't overpowering them, nothing like that. And he goes, He says, I got the solution to your problems, guys. He says, I tell you what. He says, take those speakers, he says, send them on back to me, and I'm going to send you out some new 18-inch speakers that are going to fill the bill. He goes, and that's exactly what he did. In a couple days, some boxes arrived with some new 18s. Norm took those, put those in the cabinet, set them up, and we used them, and they didn't blow up. As a matter of fact, to this day, Norm still has those cabinets and speakers, and they still work fine. You know. Now here's a little thing for your electronics geeks. The only difference between the speakers that he sent us and the speakers we had was the ones that we had originally were 4 ohms. The ones he sent us were 5. So that should tell you something, shouldn't it? At any rate, everything went fine from there on. However, this was really at the end of the massive backline systems, because PA systems became much more powerful. Everything went through the PA, and the front of house engineer would arrange it for your listening pleasure. It really provided for a better show that way. It also cut down on the volume on the stage, because I don't care who you are, you can't play under that assault of volume like that. It's just too loud, you know. Here, let's take an example here of a professional backline. This here's Yngwie Malmsteen's backline. It's got a lot of Marshalls in it. Well, you know, I mean, he is sponsored by Marshall, so you got that going for you. But at any rate, you look at it, and the more you look at it, the less sense it makes. First off, just these 2 stacks in the corner are actually turned on. And, you know, out of those 2, only the last double-headed stack here has anything plugged into the inputs. Right here and here. You know. So he's actually using a 2-headed stack. Probably has a different tone with one cabinet and then a head hooked up to the other cabinet. And, you know, for his acoustic coupling on stage and the feel. And, you know, you need a little bit of stuff there on stage, but you don't want to kill your hearing, you know. So that's what he's using. But you, the audience, you're not even hearing that, because he's only got this one speaker here mic'd, and that's going into the PA system. So the audience is hearing this single 12-inch speaker out of this entire wall of amps. Well, there you have it. You might have thought that this video was going to be about this right here. This is the Parsons Partial JCM 800 2203 Dual Master Volume 100-watt tube amp. But it isn't. You can more or less say we've been setting the scenes for this one. This one is special and requires its own episode. So until then, I'd like you to like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, And I'll see you in the next episode.